It was the last Christmas before he died. And Grandpa Walter didn't give me cash, jewelry, or even a promise of help with my HOA fines. He handed me an old wooden box that the entire Maple Grove neighborhood swore was completely empty. 3 months later, that empty box blew up the entire HOA board, exposed every rotten secret they had been hiding behind their perfect lawns, and dropped $52 million in my lap. I thought that money was a blessing, but I was wrong. It was Grandpa's revenge from the grave, and I was the blade he chose. My name is Riley Hayes, and at 34 years old, I had learned that the smell of antiseptic never really leaves your pores. It settles into your skin, a permanent reminder of the line between the living and the dead. I was an ICU nurse at North Bridge Mercy Center in Riverbend, Illinois, and I had just finished my third 12-hour shift in a row. My feet felt like lead weights and my eyes burned with a dry, gritty exhaustion that coffee could no longer touch. I sat in the break room staring at the vending machine, wondering if I had enough energy to drive home to my one-bedroom townhouse in Maple Grove HOA, or if I should just nap in my truck. My life was a series of beeping monitors, changing 4 bags, and telling families that their loved ones were comfortable when we both knew they were just sedated. It was a good life, a necessary life, but it was lonely. The pay was enough to keep the lights on and my old Ford pickup running, but barely enough to save for the endless HOA fines that kept coming. I was the responsible one. The Hayes family had plenty of dreamers and schemers, but I was the only one who knew how to clean up the blood after the crash. Then my phone buzzed against the Formica table. It was Grandpa Walter. My stomach tightened. Walter Hayes lived in the Big A-frame at the end of Maple Lane in our gated community. A solid 5-minute drive, but the HOA rules made it feel like a battlefield. He didn't call just to chat. He called when the roof leaked or when his heart medication ran out and he was too stubborn to drive to the pharmacy because Karen, the HOA president, would ticket his car for non-compliant parking. I answered, trying to keep the fatigue out of my voice. "Hey, Grandpa, everything okay?" "Riley." His voice was different. Usually it was a deep, gravelly baritone that could command a room. Now it sounded thin, like wind whistling through dry cornstalks, but underneath the frailty, there was an edge of steel I had not heard in years. "You need to come home for the HOA Christmas potluck. Everyone is coming. Your parents, Uncle Mark and Aunt Diane, the whole board. I have something I have to give to each of you. This year, Riley, it has to be this year." I looked at the calendar on the wall. It was December 23rd. "Grandpa, I work the holiday. I get double pay. Plus, Karen will fine me for missing the mandatory community event if I don't show. I do not care about the money or Karen's rules. Call in sick. Quit. I do not care. Everyone is coming. I have something I have to give to each of you. This year. It has to be this year." Then I heard it. A wet, rattling cough that he tried to suppress by moving the phone away. Then the distinct thud click of his cane hitting the hardwood floor. A sound that told me he was not sitting in his favorite armchair, but pacing. He was anxious. He was sick. "I'll be there," I said softly. The drive through the gates was a white-knuckled nightmare. The snow was falling, and the HOA welcome sign gleamed with fresh paint, but I knew the rules. No snow on lawns over 1 inch, or fine. My windshield wipers slapped back and forth. My mind drifted to the family I was driving toward. We were not the kind of family you saw in greeting card commercials. We were the kind of family that only gathered for HOA meetings and funerals, and usually we caused a scene at both. My father, Eric, and mother, Linda, lived in the McMansion down the street, driving leased cars they could not afford to impress neighbors they did not like. My Uncle Mark and Aunt Diane were worse, forever chasing get-rich schemes and looking down on anyone who actually worked for a living. And then there was the HOA board, led by Karen Victoria Lang, the Queen of Maple Grove. She was the one who made the rules. The one who fined me last month for my unsightly truck in the driveway, even though it was registered. She spoke in that fake sweet voice. As per Covenant 3.2, we must maintain aesthetic standards for property values. Dear Grandpa Walter was the anchor. Everyone treated him like a nuisance until they needed a down payment or help with a fine. They ignored him for 364 days a year. But on HOA events, they would show up drinking his wine and eyeing his house, wondering how much the land was worth per acre. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. I was the only one who knew about the leaks in his roof because I was the one who paid the contractor $2,000 last spring to fix them secretly, so Karen wouldn't fine him for non-compliant structure. I owed Walter. When I was 7, my parents had lost their house due to a bad investment. For 3 years, I lived with him. Grandpa taught me how to fish in the community pond without violating fishing rules, how to split wood, and how to sit in silence without feeling empty. He was the only person who had ever chosen me simply because I was there, not because of what I could do for the HOA. By the time I pulled into the gravel driveway, which Karen had complained about as non-gravel compliant, night had fallen. The snow had stopped, leaving the world silent and blue under the moonlight. The cabin looked smaller than I remembered. It was a sturdy A-frame structure made of dark timber nestled against a backdrop of towering pines. Smoke curled from the stone chimney carrying the scent of burning pine and roasted pumpkin. The porch steps creaked under my boots. I hesitated at the door, taking a breath of the biting cold air to clear the hospital smell from my lungs. The door swung open before I could knock. Grandpa Walter stood there. He was wearing a red wool sweater that I had bought him 5 years ago. It was frayed at the cuffs and hung loosely on his frame. He had lost weight. His cheekbones were sharp, jutting out under papery skin, and his hair was white wisps against a scalp spotted with age. But his eyes were alive. They were blue and piercing, dancing with a strange, frantic energy. He did not look like a man waiting to die. He looked like a man who had just set a trap and was waiting for the mouse. "You made it," he said, his voice raspy. He pulled me into a hug. He smelled of old spice and woods. His grip was weak, his hands trembling against my back, but he held on for a long time. "I told you I would," I whispered. We went inside. The cabin was warm, overheated, actually, the way old people kept their homes because their blood ran thin. He had made hot cocoa, the real kind. We sat at the small kitchen table. "How is the hospital?" he asked. His hands wrapped around his mug to warm them. I noticed the tremor in his fingers. "It's busy. Flu season. How are you breathing, Grandpa? You sound congested." He waved a dismissive hand. "Old plumbing pipes are rusty. Do not nurse me, Riley. Not tonight." He looked at me, studying my face. "You look tired, kid. Are you still in that shoebox townhouse on 4th Street? Karen still fining you for the truck?" "It's cozy," I defended weakly. "It's a closet. You deserve a view. You deserve to see the sky without a violation notice." I smiled. He did not smile back. He just watched me, a sadness in his gaze that made me uncomfortable. "You are too good for them. You know, you always were. The rest of them, they are sharks. But you are a dolphin in a tank of piranhas." Before I could ask what he meant, headlights swept across the front window. High beams, blindingly bright. "The circus is in town," Grandpa muttered, pushing himself up from the table. He leaned heavily on the table for a second, catching his breath before grabbing his cane. My parents were the first through the door. Linda swept in, wrapped in a faux fur coat. "Oh my God, Walter. That driveway is a death trap. Eric almost slid into the ravine. Why haven't you paid someone to salt it? Karen will fine you for unsafe conditions." She did not hug him. She brushed snow off her coat, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. Good to see you. To Linda, Grandpa said dryly. My father. Eric stomped his boots aggressively. $2,000 for snow tires and they still slip. This place is in the middle of nowhere. Dad, I missed 3 conference calls just getting here. The signal is dead because of the HOA no tower rule. Hello, Dad, I said from the kitchen doorway. They looked at me as if I were part of the furniture. Oh, Riley, you are here, my mom said. Did you bring the spinach dip I told you I wasn't cooking? 10 minutes later, the second car arrived. Uncle Mark and Aunt Diane with my cousin Cassidy in tow. Mark was wearing a cashmere scarf and a smile that did not reach his eyes. Walter, looking rustic, he boomed, looking around the small living room with thinly veiled distaste. Diane shivered theatrically. Is the heat on? Feels like an icebox in here. My sinuses are instantly flaring up. Karen says we need to report energy-inefficient homes. Cassidy, 23 years old and glued to her phone, did not even look up. 0 bars. How am I supposed to post anything? This is like being in a dungeon. The HOA Wi-Fi is probably throttled to prevent unauthorized streaming. There is Wi-Fi, Grandpa said, pointing to a dusty router in the corner. Password is on the bottom. It is probably dial-up speed, Cassidy muttered, rolling her eyes. She looked at me. Hey, Riley, you look exhausted. Do you not use concealer? Karen would fine you for that unkempt appearance, if it was a rule. Nice to see you, too, Cassidy, I said, taking a sip of my cocoa. Dinner was an exercise in endurance. We sat around the long oak table that Grandpa had built himself 40 years ago. There was a turkey, which I had helped Grandpa pull out of the oven, and mashed potatoes that were slightly lumpy because his hands were too weak to mash them thoroughly. No one complimented the food. So, Dad, Uncle Mark started cutting a piece of dry turkey. I was reading about the property values in this county, up 6% since last year. Developers are looking for land for vacation rentals. You sit on 40 acres here. That is a lot of liquidity tied up in dirt. I am not selling, Mark, Grandpa said, staring at his plate. We are just saying. My father chimed in, pouring himself a 3rd glass of Grandpa's wine. It is irresponsible to not have a plan. You are getting up there. Assisted living facilities cost a fortune. $5,000 a month for the decent ones. If you do not have the liquid assets, you become a burden on the family. And the HOA reserve fund is low. Karen says we need to raise dues. I have everything covered, Grandpa said quietly. Do you? Aunt Diane asked, her voice high and sharp. Because last time we spoke, you complained about the heating bill. We are just worried. Walter, we have our own struggles. Mark's business is in a sensitive transition phase. Eric and Linda are leveraged on the house. We cannot exactly carry you if things go south. Plus, as board members, we have to think about the community. I gripped my fork so hard my knuckles turned white. They were not worried about carrying him. They were worried there would be nothing left for them to take. They were picking at his bones while he was still sitting at the head of the table. And Karen was probably in on it, waiting for the moment to seize control. I paid the heating bill, I said, my voice cutting through the chatter. The table went silent. Excuse me? My mother asked. The heating bill, I repeated, looking her in the eye. I paid it last month and the roof repair in the spring. You do not have to worry. Grandpa is not a burden. And it kept Karen from fining him for code violation. My father laughed. A nervous, condescending sound. Well, isn't that sweet? Riley to the rescue with her nurse's salary. That is cute, honey. But we are talking about real financial planning here. Estate planning, real money. The HOA could use that land for a new pool or something. Grandpa slammed his hand on the table. The silverware rattled. The silence that followed was instant and heavy. Grandpa was breathing hard, a wheezing sound escaping his chest. He looked around the table, meeting the eyes of every single person there. He looked at Mark's greedy anticipation, at my parents' impatient annoyance at Cassidy's boredom. And then he looked at me. His eyes softened just for a fraction of a second before turning hard again. "You want to talk about assets?" Grandpa said. His voice was low, deadly calm. "You want to talk about what I have left? We just want what is best for you." Mom lied. "After dinner," Grandpa announced, pushing his plate away. The food was barely touched. "I have a gift for everyone. I called you all here for a reason. This is the last time we will all be together here." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. It was physical, like a drop in barometric pressure. My father sat up straighter. Uncle Mark uncrossed his arms. Even Cassidy lowered her phone. "The last time?" Aunt Diane asked, her voice dropping to a whisper that sounded almost hopeful. "What do you mean, Walter? Is there something you haven't told us?" "I mean what I said," Grandpa replied. "I have arranged everything. Tonight, I am giving out my legacy. I wanted to do it while I could still look you in the eye." I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty window. I looked at my family and the board members. Their eyes were shining. They were not tearing up at the thought of losing their father. They were calculating. I could practically see the dollar signs spinning in their pupils like slot machines. They were thinking about the 40 acres. They were thinking about the hidden savings. They were thinking about freedom from their own bad decisions and the HOA dues they could control. It was disgusting. I looked at Grandpa, wanting to tell him to stop, to kick them out, to keep whatever he had for himself. But he was not looking at me anymore. He was staring at the candle in the center of the table, a small sad smile playing on his lips. It was the smile of a man who knew the punchline to a joke that no one else understood yet. "Finish your potatoes," Grandpa said softly. "The pie is in the oven, and then we will open the box." The dinner plates had been cleared away, leaving grease stains on the lace tablecloth that I knew I would be scrubbing out later. The air in the cabin was thick, not just with the smell of roasting turkey and stale wine, but with a suffocating electric greed. It was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. My family and the board sat in the living room, their eyes darting toward the hallway where Grandpa Walter had disappeared a few moments ago. My father, Eric, was pacing near the fireplace, swirling the dregs of his Merlot. "He has to have sold the timber rights," he muttered to Uncle Mark. "That is the only explanation. The market is up. If he sold the rights, we are talking 6 figures. Easy. And the HOA could finally fund that new community center Karen keeps pushing." Mark nodded, loosening his tie. Or maybe he finally liquidated those old bonds Mom talked about. Either way, this whole dramatic pause is unnecessary. Just cut the checks and let us go. I just hope it is enough for the remodel. Karen says the board needs new office furniture. I sat in the corner on a stiff armchair, my hands folded in my lap. I wanted to scream at them. I wanted to tell them that they were vultures circling a man who was still breathing. A man who had just cooked them dinner with trembling hands. But I stayed silent. I was the coward who kept the peace. Then the floorboards creaked. Grandpa Walter emerged from the hallway. He was walking slowly, his cane thumping rhythmically against the rug. In one arm, he cradled a stack of white envelopes, thin and crisp. Under his other arm, pressed against his rib cage, was a wooden crate. It was not wrapped. It was old, dark oak, about the size of a shoebox, but taller. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the popping of a log in the fireplace. "Sit down, Eric," Grandpa said, his voice low but commanding. My father sat. Grandpa placed the items on the coffee table. He took a breath, a wheezing rattle that made my heart ache, and looked at each of them. There was no warmth in his gaze anymore. It was the look of a judge staring down a row of defendants who did not know they were on trial. "I told you I had gifts," he said. "I have thought a long time about what each of you deserves, what you need." He picked up the first envelope. Eric, Linda. My parents leaned forward in unison, their movements synchronized by avarice. My father took the envelope, his fingers twitching. He held it up to the light for a split second, gauging its thickness. It was thin, too thin for a stack of cash, but perfect for a check. A smile flickered on his face. "Thank you, Dad," he said, the words smooth and practiced. "Mark, Diane." He handed the next envelope to my uncle. Mark grinned, giving a mock salute. "Appreciate it, Pop." "Really, Cassidy?" My cousin did not even look up from her phone as she reached out a hand. "Thanks, Grandpa," she mumbled, snatching the envelope and placing it on her lap without opening it. She was probably texting her friends about how boring this was. Then Grandpa turned to me. He did not reach for an envelope. There were no more envelopes left. He reached for the box. It was a beautiful ancient thing. The wood was dark with age and polish, the grains swirling and deep hypnotic patterns. The corners were reinforced with brass that had tarnished to a dull brown. There was a lock on the front, a heavy iron mechanism that was rusted shut, or so it appeared, but the latch was undone. He picked it up with both hands. It looked heavy. "Riley," he said softly. The room shifted. I felt the collective confusion of my family and the board like a blast of cold air. They were staring at the box, then at their envelopes, then back at the box. "Wait," my mother said, her voice sharp. "What is that?" "A gift," Grandpa said. He walked over to me and placed the box in my hands. It was heavier than it looked. The wood felt warm, vibrating slightly, as if it had absorbed the heat of the fire. I ran my thumb over the rough grain of the lid. "Go ahead," Grandpa whispered. "Open it." My heart hammered against my ribs. I did not care about the money. I truly did not. But the way everyone was looking at me with a mixture of jealousy and suspicion made my skin crawl. They thought I was getting the jackpot. They thought this was the gold, the jewelry, the deeds. I lifted the latch. It groaned, a sound of metal grinding on metal. I pushed the heavy lid back. I looked inside. I blinked. It was empty. The interior was just bare, unfinished wood. It smelled of sawdust and old air. There was no velvet lining. There was no stack of bills. There was no diamond ring. There was absolutely nothing but the dark, empty space of a wooden box. I stared at it, confused. I looked up at Grandpa, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to reach behind my ear and pull out a coin or tell me to check a hidden compartment. But he just stood there watching me. "Is that it?" Uncle Mark asked, his voice booming in the quiet room. "It is empty," Cassidy announced. She had finally looked up. She leaned over, peering into the box on my lap. "It is literally just a box. An empty box." The silence stretched for one heartbeat, 2, 3. Then the laughter started. It began with a snort from Uncle Mark, then a high-pitched giggle from Aunt Diane. Within seconds, the room was filled with it. It was not good-natured laughter. It was the sound of relief and mockery. They were relieved that I had not received a fortune, and they were mocking the absurdity of the gift. "Oh my God," Cassidy said, fumbling for her phone. She held it up, aiming the camera at me and the box flash. "Grandpa gives Riley a literal box of nothing for Christmas." Iconic. I heard the whoosh of the send button. Broke Grandpa empty box HOA. My face burned. I felt heat rising up my neck, flooding my cheeks. I wanted to close the lid to hide the emptiness, but my hands were frozen. "Well," my father chuckled, shaking his head. He leaned in toward my mother, whispering loudly enough for everyone to hear. I told you he was losing it. He probably thinks he put something in there. Poor old man is senile. He gave her a box of air. It is rustic, Aunt Diane sneered, looking at the box with disdain. I bet he found it in the barn. It is probably full of termites. Honestly, I prefer the envelope. At least I can spend what is inside. I have no use for sentimental trash. Maybe you can use it for firewood, Riley, since you paid the heating bill and all. Their cruelty was casual, easy. They stripped Grandpa of his dignity right in front of him, talking about him as if he were a confused child or a piece of broken furniture. But Karen would love this post, I thought bitterly. Another violation of community spirit. I looked at Grandpa. He was not looking at them. He was not angry. He was not embarrassed. He was smiling. It was a small, tight smile, barely visible at the corners of his mouth. He was looking straight at me, his blue eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made the rest of the room fade away. The box is yours, Riley, he said, his voice cutting through their laughter. It is for you. Keep it. He leaned in closer, his hand resting on my shoulder. His grip was surprisingly strong. Do not throw it away, he whispered, so only I could hear. Not yet, I shivered. The way he said not yet sent a strange vibration through my bones. It sounded like a warning or a promise. Okay, Grandpa, I whispered back, my voice trembling. Thank you. I love it. Oh, stop it, Riley, my mother snapped. You do not have to patronize him. It is an empty box. Just put it down. All right, my father said, clapping his hands together. Show is over. Now, let us see what the real gifts are. I have got a contractor waiting on a deposit for that kitchen. He ripped open his envelope. The sound of tearing paper echoed in the room. Uncle Mark followed suit, then Diane, then Cassidy. They tore into them with the hunger of wild dogs. My father pulled out a card, a simple store-bought Christmas card with a picture of a snowman on the front. He shook the envelope upside down. Nothing fell out. He opened the card. I watched his eyes scan the inside. I watched his face go from eager anticipation to confusion and then to a deep, dark shade of purple. What is this? He whispered. A card. Aunt Diane shrieked. She was shaking her envelope violently as if a check might be stuck in the corner. It is just a card. Where is the check? Where is the cash? Merry Christmas, Grandpa said calmly. I hope you like the design. I picked them out myself. You have got to be kidding me, Uncle Mark said, throwing his card onto the coffee table. We drove through a blizzard for a card. Read the inside, Grandpa suggested. My father read it out loud, his voice dripping with venom. Dear Eric, thank you for coming to see me. It means a lot to have family near. Love, Dad. He looked up, his eyes bulging. That is it? Thanks for coming, Dad. Are you serious? We have expenses. We took time off work. I never promised you money, Grandpa said, leaning back against the mantel. He looked tired now, the energy draining out of him. But he held his ground. I promised you a gift. My gift is my gratitude. I wanted to see my family. This is unbelievable, my mother hissed. She stood up, grabbing her coat. He is definitely senile or just cruel. Do you know how much the gas costs to get here? Do you know what I could be doing right now? It is a joke, Cassidy said, scrolling on her phone, looking bored again now that the potential for money was gone. I told you guys he was broke. He lives in a shack in the woods. Why did you think he had money? Because he sold the company, my father shouted. He should have millions. Where is it, Dad? Did you hide it? Did you give it to some scammer on the internet? I spent it, Grandpa said simply. It is gone. All of it, Uncle Mark asked, his face pale. Millions of dollars. You spent it on what? You wear the same sweater every day. Life, Grandpa said. The room exploded. They were shouting over each other. A cacophony of entitlement and rage. At least you could have helped with the mortgage. This is selfish, Walter. Purely selfish. I cannot believe we wasted Christmas on this. A $1 card. Seriously, a $1 card. I sat there clutching the wooden box to my chest. The wood dug into my ribs. I felt tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. Not for myself, but for him. I was humiliated for him. I was ashamed that these people shared my DNA. They were screaming at a dying man because he had not paid them for their presents. I wanted to stand up and scream at them to get out. I wanted to throw the box at my father's head, but I stayed frozen, paralyzed by the sheer ugliness of it all. I looked at Grandpa. He was just watching them, his face unreadable, absorbing their hate like a stone absorbs rain. I think we should go, my mother announced, buttoning her coat with angry, jerky movements. It is freezing in here. The beds are lumpy and clearly we are not appreciated. We are going to the motel in town. My father spat. I am not sleeping under this roof tonight. Not after this insult. Me neither, Mark said. Come on, Diane. Let us go. They stormed out like a hurricane in reverse. The door slammed shut behind them. Once, twice, 3 times. I heard car engines roaring to life outside, tires spinning aggressively on the gravel, and then the fading crunch of their departure. The silence rushed back into the cabin, heavy and ringing. I was still sitting in the chair. Grandpa was still standing by the fire. You are not going? He asked softly. No, I said, my voice thick. I am staying. The dishes need to be done. And someone has to shovel the walk in the morning. He nodded slowly. He looked exhausted, his skin gray in the firelight. You are a good girl, Riley. You always were. Why did you do that? Grandpa, I asked, looking down at the empty box in my lap. Why did you invite them if you knew it would end like this? Because I needed to know, he said. He did not explain what he needed to know. He just sighed and tapped his cane on the floor. I am going to bed. Lock the door. Will you? I will, I said after he went into his bedroom and I heard the soft click of his door. I cleaned the kitchen. I scrubbed the grease from the tablecloth. I washed the plates they had eaten off of and the glasses they had drunk from. I swept the floor when everything was silent. I walked over to the mantel where I had placed the box. Sat there, dark and heavy, a block of wood that had caused a war. I reached out and touched the lid. It was cool now. I thought about what Cassidy had said. Empty box. I thought about my father's sneer. Senile. I picked it up. Felt solid. Just a block of wood. I gave it a little shake just out of frustration. Just to feel the weight of it. Clack, clack. I froze. It was faint. Barely a whisper. A soft rhythmic sound from deep inside the wood. I shook it again. Harder this time. Clack, clack. It sounded like something sliding. Something small and hard hitting the wood. But I had looked inside. I had run my hands along the bottom. It was empty. It was solid wood. I opened the lid again. I stared into the darkness of the box. I pressed on the bottom. Solid. I pressed on the sides. Solid. You are imagining things, Riley, I whispered to myself. It is just a loose screw in the hinge or a piece of dried glue rattling around. It had to be. Grandpa was broke. He had said so himself. He had spent it all on life. There was nothing in this box but good intentions and bad memories. I closed the lid and latched it. I put it back on the shelf next to a picture of me and him fishing when I was 10. I turned off the living room light, plunging the cabin into darkness, and tried to ignore the feeling that the box was watching me. I tried to ignore the feeling that the clack-clack was the sound of a countdown beginning. The 3 days that followed Christmas were the quietest of my life. After the taillights of my family's cars had vanished into the snowy darkness, a profound silence settled over the cabin in Maple Grove. It was not a lonely silence. It was the kind of peace that feels like a heavy wool blanket, warm and protective. The blizzard that had threatened to bury us tapered off into a gentle, steady snowfall that coated the world in pristine white, hiding the tire tracks and the anger of the night before. I stayed. I did not have to. I could have driven back to Riverbend in my lonely townhouse. But the thought of leaving Grandpa Walter alone in that big creaking house made my chest ache. So, I called the hospital and traded 2 shifts with a coworker who needed the cash. Buying myself 72 hours of time, I spent those days moving. My body, accustomed to the frantic, adrenaline-fueled pace of the ICU, needed a different kind of labor to settle down. I shoveled the walkway, the rhythmic scrape-thud of the plastic shovel against the ice becoming a meditation. I found a toolbox in the shed and fixed the hinge on the back door that had been screaming every time the wind blew. I spent an entire afternoon chopping kindling, feeling the satisfying shock of the axe handle against my palms, smelling the sharp, resinous scent of split pine. Grandpa watched me. He spent most of his time in his leather armchair by the window, a book in his lap that he rarely read. He just watched me work. He looked friendlier than I had ever seen him, his skin possessing a translucent quality like parchment paper, but his eyes were bright. On the second afternoon, I was in the kitchen stirring a pot of beef stew. The windows were steamed up, shutting out the cold world outside. Grandpa hobbled in, leaning on his cane, and poured himself a glass of water. "You are just like me," he said suddenly. I looked up, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "Stubborn?" I asked with a smile. "No," he said, shaking his head slowly. "A worker. You like to do things. The rest of them, your father, your uncle, they like to talk about doing things. They like to hold meetings about doing things. But you just pick up the shovel." He took a sip of water, his hand trembling slightly. "That is why you are tired, Riley. The world is heavy for the people who actually carry it." I stopped stirring. The description felt too accurate, piercing through the armor I wore every day at the hospital. "Someone has to carry it, Grandpa." "Maybe," he murmured, looking out the foggy window. "Or maybe you just need to learn when to put it down." It sounded like a joke, but the way he looked at me with a mixture of pride and profound sadness made it feel like a farewell. Later that day, I decided to tackle the attic. It was a dusty, cavernous space under the eaves that had not been organized in a decade. I wanted to clear out the old newspapers and broken furniture so Grandpa would not trip if he ever came up here. The air up there was dry and smelled of old paper and cedar. I was filling a black trash bag with yellowed magazines from 1985 when I saw the wooden box. I had brought it up with me earlier, thinking I might find a safe place to store it among the other keepsakes. But in my cleaning frenzy, I had piled a stack of old curtains right on top of it. I grabbed the bundle of curtains to shove them into the donation pile, and the box tumbled out, sliding across the floorboards toward the trash bag. For a split second, I stared at it. It was just a block of wood. It was the source of my humiliation, the punchline to my family's cruel joke. A part of me, the part that was still stinging from my father's laughter, wanted to just kick it into the trash. Why keep a reminder of being the granddaughter who got nothing? I reached for the trash bag. "Don't." The voice came from the bottom of the stairs. I jumped, dropping the bag. Grandpa was standing at the foot of the attic ladder, looking up. He must have heard me moving around. "Don't throw it away, Riley," he called out, his voice echoing in the stairwell. I was just moving things," I stammered, feeling guilty though I wasn't sure why. I picked up the box. Felt heavy and solid in my hands. "Keep it near you," he said, his tone urgent. Put it on your nightstand. Put it on your shelf. Just keep it close. One day you will need it. Grandpa, it is just a box, I said, dusting off the lid. But I will keep it. I promise. He lingered at the bottom of the stairs for a moment longer, as if making sure I wasn't lying before shuffling away. I took the box back downstairs and placed it on the small table beside the sofa where I was sleeping. It sat there unassuming and silent, a mystery I was too tired to solve. The final evening was the hardest. We both knew I had to leave in the morning. The snow had stopped and the sky was a deep bruised purple as the sun went down. We sat in front of the fireplace, the heat radiating against our shins. I had made tea and the only sound was the crackle of the logs. Grandpa was in a storytelling mood. He usually told stories about fishing or the war, but tonight he talked about business. He talked about the late 1990s, a time when the internet was the Wild West. I never told your father the specifics, he said, staring into the flames. He would not have understood. He sees business as a way to buy things. I saw it as a puzzle. He told me about a software company he had started in a rented garage in 1996. It was a dull logistical software for supply chain management. Nothing sexy, nothing that would make headlines. Everyone thought I was just tinkering with computers. He chuckled softly. Your mother used to tell people I was fixing typewriters, but the code worked. It worked better than anything else on the market. In 2001, a conglomerate from Chicago came knocking. They did not want the software. They wanted the patent. I listened, fascinated. I had always known Grandpa was smart, but I had viewed him through the lens of my family, the sweet, simple man who lived in the woods. I had never realized he was a shark in his own right. Did you sell it? I asked. I did, he nodded. For a number that would make your Uncle Mark pass out. But I never changed how I lived. I liked this house. I liked the quiet. Money makes noise. Riley, it screams at you. I did not want the noise. He turned to look at me. The firelight danced in his eyes, making them look young again. Riley, let me ask you something. A hypothetical question. Okay, I said. If you had enough money that you never had to worry about a bill again, not a mortgage, not a car payment, not a student loan, what would you do? Would you buy a mansion? Would you travel the world? I thought about it. I thought about the alarm clock that went off at 4:30 in the morning. I thought about the way my back screamed after turning a 200-pound patient. I thought about the guilt of picking up extra shifts just to pay for a new transmission. I would not stop working, I said slowly. I love being a nurse, but I would change how I do it. I would stop taking the overtime shifts that kill me. I would spend more time sitting with the patients who have no one. Instead of rushing to chart the next one, I would maybe work 3 days a week. I would volunteer. I looked at him and I would stop letting people buy my kindness. I am always the one who says yes because I'm afraid of losing my job or losing people's approval. If I had money, I would just be free. I would be the one who chooses. Grandpa smiled. It was a genuine wide smile that showed his teeth. Free, he repeated. That is a good word. That is the only thing money is good for. Buying your own freedom. We sat in silence for a long time after that. That night, I could not sleep. The sofa was comfortable enough, but my mind was racing with the story of the software company. Was it true, or was it just the ramblings of a dying mind, constructing a glorious past to compensate for a lonely present? I rolled over and my hand brushed against the wooden box on the side table. I pulled it toward me in the dark. The moonlight from the window washed over it, turning the wood silver. I ran my fingers over the smooth surface, tracing the brass corners. It was locked. The hasp rusted shut, but the lid was unlatched. I opened it, darkness inside. I stuck my hand in, feeling the bottom. It was smooth, sanded wood. But as my fingernail grazed the edge where the bottom met the side wall, I felt something. A ridge. It was tiny, thinner than a hair, a seam. I frowned in the dark. I pushed down on the bottom panel. It was solid. I pushed on the corners. Solid. But that ridge, it felt like the bottom panel was not actually the bottom. It felt like a false floor fitted with the precision of a master carpenter. I sat up, grabbing my phone to use the flashlight. The harsh white LED beam cut through the shadows. I peered into the box. Visually, it looked perfect. The grain of the wood matched perfectly. But when I ran the tip of my nail along that seam again, I was sure of it. There was a gap, a microscopic gap. I tried to pry it up with my fingernail, but it was too tight. I shook the box again. Clack. There it was. The sound of something sliding underneath the false bottom. "You are losing your mind, Riley," I whispered. "It is just a manufacturing defect. It is an old box." I turned off the flashlight. Grandpa had said he spent all the money. He had said it was gone. If there was a secret compartment, what could possibly be in there? An old letter, a picture of Grandma. I closed the lid and latched it. I pushed the box away, suddenly afraid of it. If I opened it and found nothing but dust, I would be disappointed all over again. I preferred the mystery to the reality. The next morning, the air was crisp and cold. I packed my bag and loaded the truck. Grandpa stood on the porch wrapped in his red sweater, leaning heavily on his cane. "Call me when you get there," he said the standard goodbye. But then he did something he rarely did. He dropped the cane. It clattered on the porch floor. He stepped forward and wrapped both arms around me, pulling me into a hug that knocked the wind out of me. He felt so fragile, like a bundle of dry sticks held together by willpower. But his arms were fierce. He buried his face in my hair. "You are the best of us, Riley," he whispered against my ear. "Do not forget that when they come for you, and they will. Remember that you are the only one who is real." I pulled back, tears stinging my eyes. "Grandpa, you are talking like you are not going to see me next week." He smiled, reaching up to cup my cheek. His hand was cold. "Just listen to me. When everything becomes very noisy, when the world starts shouting at you, open the box. But do not open it because you want something. Do not open it for greed. Open it when you need the truth." "I don't understand," I said. "You will," he said. He picked up his cane. "Go on now. Drive safe. Watch out for the ice on the bridge." I got into my truck. I watched him in the rearview mirror as I drove down the long winding driveway. He stood there on the porch, a small red figure against the white snow in the dark pine trees, watching me until I turned the corner and he disappeared from sight. The drive back to Riverbend was strange. Usually, after a family gathering, I felt drained and anxious, but this time I felt a peculiar sense of calm. The radio was off. The engine hummed. I felt like I was carrying a shield. I did not understand Grandpa's words, not fully, but I felt loved. I felt seen. For the first time in years, I did not feel like the family doormat. I felt like I had been given a sword, even if I did not know how to draw it yet. 2 days later, I was back in the ICU. The chaos swallowed me whole. Monitors beeping, doctors shouting orders, the smell of bleach and sickness. I fell back into the rhythm of 12-hour shifts, of saving lives and losing them. But every night when I came home to my empty townhouse, the first thing I saw was the box. I had placed it on the highest shelf of my bookcase, right next to my nursing school diploma. Sat there, dark and silent, overlooking my small living room. Sometimes, when the street lights outside flickered, the brass corners seemed to glint like watching eyes. It was waiting. I did not know what it was waiting for, but every time I looked at it, I heard Grandpa's voice. "Not yet. Open it when you need the truth." I left it locked. I went to work. I paid my bills. And I waited for the noise to begin. The darkness hit my townhouse like a physical blow. It was a Tuesday night, 3 weeks after Christmas, and a winter storm had snapped a transformer down the block. 1 second I was heating up leftover lasagna in the microwave, and the next the hum of the refrigerator died. The lights vanished and the world shrank down to the sound of my own breathing. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, a sharp cone of harsh white light swinging across my living room. It illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air, the stack of unpaid HOA violation notices on the counter, and the worn fabric of my couch. Then the light swung across the bookshelf. It stopped on the box. Grandpa's wooden box sat on the top shelf where I had left it, looking innocuous and dull. But in the stark, single-source lighting of the flashlight, the shadows were playing tricks. The box cast a long, distorted shadow against the peeling beige paint of the wall. The shadow did not look like a box. It looked like a door. A black rectangular door opening into a wall that wasn't there. My heart gave a strange, violent thud against my ribs. When everything becomes very noisy, open the box. The townhouse was dead silent, but my life had been deafening lately. My mother had called 3 times that day to complain about her credit card interest rates. My car needed new brake pads. The hospital was cutting overtime hours. Karen had already sent 2 new violation notices for suspicious activity around elderly residents' property. The noise Grandpa talked about was not acoustic. It was the grinding pressure of survival. I walked over to the shelf. My hand trembled as I reached up. The box felt cold, absorbing the chill of the unheated room. I sat on the floor, placing the box in the circle of light from my phone. I ran my thumb over the bottom again. I found that microscopic ridge I had felt in the attic. It was there. It was real. I went to the kitchen drawer and pulled out a paring knife. The metal was dull, but the tip was thin enough. "This is crazy," I whispered to the empty room. "You are breaking an antique because you are lonely and broke." But I did not stop. I wedged the tip of the knife into the hairline seam at the bottom of the box. I applied pressure. The wood groaned. It was a dry, protesting sound. I pushed harder, terrified I would crack the oak, but desperate to know. Pop! A small panel on the bottom of the box sprang loose. It did not fall off. It pivoted on a hidden internal hinge that was a masterpiece of carpentry. I dropped the knife. The false bottom was shallow, barely a quarter of an inch deep. It was lined with blue felt that had faded to gray. Nestled inside were 2 things. The first was a key. It was not a house key. It was a long, heavy brass key with a flat head and complex teeth. The kind used for high-security safety deposit boxes. Engraved on the head was a number 402. The second was a piece of yellow legal pad paper folded into a tight square. My fingers felt numb as I unfolded the paper. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Grandpa's, but from years ago when his hand was steady and his loops were sharp. "Riley, if you found this, it means you kept the box. It means you did not throw me away when I had nothing to give you. Take the key to Howard Kane. He is my lawyer in town. His office is behind the bakery. Do not tell your father. Do not tell anyone. Go alone. Grandpa." I read the note 3 times. I shined the flashlight on the key again. Midwestern Trust and Savings. The logo was stamped faintly on the metal. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the dark, clutching the key, waiting for the power to come back on, waiting for the sun to rise, waiting for my life to change or implode. On Saturday morning, I called in sick. It was the first time in 5 years I had called in sick when I wasn't actually dying of the flu. I drove the 5 hours to Maple Grove in a daze. The radio was off. The landscape blurred past. A wash of gray and white. But my mind was focused on that brass key burning a hole in my pocket. Howard Kane's office was exactly where the note said, tucked behind a bakery that smelled of yeast and cinnamon. The building was brick, crumbling slightly at the corners. The sign on the door was hand-painted and peeling. Howard Kane, attorney at law, wills, trusts, estates. I pushed the door open. A bell jingled overhead. The office was small, cluttered with stacks of files that leaned like towers of pizza. Dust motes floated in the shafts of sunlight coming through the blinds. Behind a massive mahogany desk sat a man who looked like he had been carved out of the same wood. He was ancient, with tufts of white hair sticking out from his ears and a suit that was 20 years out of style. He looked up over his spectacles as I walked in. He did not ask who I was. He did not ask what I wanted. He looked at my hands. He saw the wooden box I was clutching. A long, slow sigh escaped him. It was the sound of a man who had been holding his breath for a very long time. "You found it," he said. His voice was like dry leaves scraping together. "I found it," I said, my voice shaking. I walked forward and placed the box and the key on his desk. Howard Kane closed the file he was reading. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. I was beginning to worry. "Ms. Hayes, your grandfather said you were sharp, but he also said you were too polite. He worried you would just put the box on a shelf and never look at it again." "I almost did," I admitted. He nodded. He stood up, his joints popping, and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner. He unlocked it with a key on his belt and pulled out a thick red accordion folder. He dropped it on the desk. The label on the front was typed in bold black ink. Operation Empty Box. "Operation Empty Box?" I asked, staring at the label. "Walter had a sense of humor," Howard said, a small smile touching his lips, "and a deep sense of paranoia regarding your father." He opened the folder. It was packed with documents, bank statements, stock certificates, legal deeds. "Riley," Howard said, his tone turning serious, "what I am about to tell you is privileged information. It is also the legal execution of the Walter Hayes Revocable Trust." He pushed a piece of paper toward me. It was a summary sheet. "Your grandfather did sell his software company in 2001. He sold it for $12 million. But Walter was not a spender. He was an investor, a brilliant one. He put that money into diversified portfolios, aggressive tech stocks in the early 2000s, and land acquisitions." He tapped a number at the bottom of the page. "As of the closing of the markets yesterday, the total value of the assets in the trust is $52,400,000 and some change." The room spun. I grabbed the edge of the desk to keep from falling. 52 million. 52 million. Howard repeated firmly. "And change." I felt the blood drain from my face. I thought I was going to be sick. "That is impossible." He lived in a cabin. He drove a 1998 Chevy. I paid his heating bill. "He told me about that," Howard said softly. "He said it was the best investment return he ever saw. $2,000 to find out who really loved him." "This is a mistake," I whispered. "This has to be a mistake. My family, they need this. My dad is in debt. Mark is Mark is Mark." "The trust is very specific," Howard said, tapping a paragraph in the legal document. "The primary beneficiary is the individual who physically presents the key from the wooden box to the executor. That is you. If the box had been discarded or destroyed, or if you had told your family and they had brought it here, the trust would have been dissolved and the assets donated to the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital." Walter was very clear. This money was only for the person who valued him when he had nothing. 52 million, I repeated. The number was too big. It was abstract. It was a gross domestic product of a small island nation. It was not something that belonged to Riley Hayes, the nurse who clipped coupons for laundry detergent. "We need to go to the bank," Howard said, grabbing his coat. "Midwestern Trust. It is 2 blocks over." We need to verify the contents of the safe deposit box and sign the transfer of trusteeship. The walk to the bank felt like a hallucination. The wind bit at my face, but I was sweating. The bank vault was a room of stainless steel and silence. The bank manager, a woman who looked like she ironed her socks, treated Howard with deference and me with suspicion until Howard produced the paperwork. They led us to box number 402. I put the brass key into the lock. The manager put her guard key into the other slot. They turned them in unison. Click. I pulled the long metal drawer out. Inside, there were no stacks of cash. It was not a movie. There were bonds. Bearer bonds. The next weeks were a blur of paperwork and quiet terror. I transferred the assets into a new trust account in my name. I paid off my truck, my student loans, and quietly fixed Grandpa's roof one last time before the final paperwork closed. But the noise started the moment the first transfer cleared. Karen posted on the Maple Grove HOA Facebook group, "Shocking news. Neighbors, Riley Hayes has been seen at the lawyer's office with a suspicious box. Is this how we treat our elderly? We must protect our community standards." The comments exploded. My father shared it. Uncle Mark liked it. Cassidy posted screenshots of the empty box with the caption "Grandpa's senile, gift to the rule breaker." Fines started arriving daily: unauthorized inheritance activity, emotional manipulation of resident, non-compliant emotional distress to community. Each one stamped with Karen's perfect signature and a threat of lien on my property. My hospital HR director called me in. "We've received dozens of calls from concerned HOA members. They say you're a danger to patients. We're placing you on unpaid administrative leave pending investigation." I sat in my townhouse staring at the box. The clack-clack was gone now that the false bottom was open, but the noise was louder than ever. Karen's voice echoed in every group chat. "As per Covenant 17.3, we cannot allow manipulation of vulnerable residents. The board is investigating." I called Howard. "They're coming for me," he sighed. Walter knew they would. That's why he left the video clause. "What video?" "You'll see when the time comes. For now, stay quiet. Let them dig their own graves." The lawsuit arrived by certified mail the next week. The HOA board, led by Karen, claimed undue influence, fraud, and demanded the assets be turned over to the Community Reserve Fund for the good of all residents. My father joined as co-plaintiff. The papers called me a thief, a manipulator, a danger to the neighborhood. The same people who laughed at an empty box now swore I had poisoned a dying man for money. I hired Amelia Rhodes, a shark of a lawyer who smiled like a predator when she read the complaint. "This is beautiful," she said. "They built their whole case on public posts mocking the box. We're going to use their own words against them." The courtroom in Maple County smelled of lemon floor polish and stale anxiety. It was a Tuesday morning and the room was packed. I had expected a private hearing, a quiet affair between lawyers, but my family and the board had done their job well. The rows behind the wooden railing were filled with curious neighbors, distant cousins I had not seen in a decade, and a handful of local bloggers who were live-tweeting the $52 million nurse scandal. I sat at the defense table next to Amelia Rhodes. She looked calm, terrifyingly so, flipping through her notes with a precision that unsettled me. On the other hand, felt like I was vibrating out of my skin. I wore my gray blazer, the armor I had chosen for this war, but under the fluorescent lights, I felt exposed. Across the aisle, the plaintiffs sat like a portrait of grieving nobility. My father, Eric, wore a black suit that fit him a little too tightly around the waist. My mother, Linda, was draped in a conservative navy dress, clutching a tissue she had not used yet. Uncle Mark and Aunt Diane looked somber, and Cassidy sat on the end, looking small and fragile, a performance she had perfected over 23 years. Karen Victoria Lang sat front and center in her HOA president blazer, clutching her covenant binder like a shield. Judge Harrison entered the room, his black robes billowing. He was a stern man with a face like a topographic map of a canyon, deep lines and zero patience. "We are here to hear the motion for a preliminary injunction and the petition to revoke the Walter Hayes Trust," Judge Harrison said, his voice booming without a microphone. "Mr. Sterling, you may proceed." The board's lawyer, Mr. Sterling, stood up. He was a slick man from the city with a tan that looked painted on and teeth that were blindingly white. He buttoned his jacket and walked toward the bench. "Your Honor, this is a tragedy, a simple, heartbreaking tragedy. Walter Hayes was a beloved neighbor and grandfather. But in his final months, he was a man in decline. He was lonely. He was confused. He was suffering from the cognitive fog that so often accompanies the end of life." He gestured toward me without looking at me. And into this fog stepped Riley Hayes, a nurse, a professional trained in medical care. She knew how to manipulate a failing mind. She knew how to isolate a vulnerable old man from the community that loved him. She used fear of his health, fear of abandonment, to coerce him into signing documents he could not possibly understand. Sterling paused for effect, looking at the reporters in the back row. "No one in this neighborhood knew about the money. $52 million. It is absurd. Walter Hayes lived in a cabin. He clipped coupons. If he truly had this fortune, why did he not share it? Why did he hide it? The answer is simple. He did not know he was signing it away, or he was delusional. And the defendant took advantage of that delusion to steal a legacy that belongs to his family and the HOA reserve fund." I gripped the edge of the table. Amelia placed a hand on my arm, squeezing it hard. "Let them talk," she whispered. "Let them dig." They called my father to the stand. He looked aged. His shoulders slumped. He took the oath, his voice trembling just the right amount. "Mr. Hayes," Sterling asked gently, "describe your father's mental state in the last year." Eric took a deep breath, dabbing his dry eyes with the tissue. "He was not himself. He would call me on the phone and call me by my brother's name. He forgot to pay bills. I would go over there and find unpaid notices on the counter. He would tell stories that made no sense. Stories about businesses he sold 20 years ago. Things we knew weren't true. We thought it was just harmless storytelling. We did not know he was being manipulated into signing legal documents based on those fantasies. And did you try to help him?" "We tried." Eric cried out, a sob catching in his throat. "We wanted to move him to a facility. We wanted to get him proper care. But Riley, she blocked us. She told him we were trying to lock him up. She poisoned him against the board. She made him think we were the enemy, so she could have him all to herself." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted copper. It was a lie. A meticulously crafted, disgusting lie. Amelia's cross-examination was surgical. She produced visitor logs, GPS data, and proved my father hadn't been inside Grandpa's house in 3 years. "So you were lying when you said you saw notices on his counter?" The courtroom murmured. Cassidy took the stand next, tossing her hair like it was a runway. "The box? It was so weird. We were all having a nice dinner. Grandpa was happy. Then Riley started whispering to him. Next thing we know, he brings out this old wooden box. He gives it to her, and she made this big show of opening it. She acted like she expected it, like it was a code or something. She made Grandpa give it to her. She practically demanded it. She always made him feel like he owed her because she was a nurse. And how did she treat him otherwise? She controlled him. If I wanted to visit, she would say he was sick. She isolated him so she could get the money. That box, it wasn't a gift. It was a trophy." Amelia didn't cross-examine her. She just smiled a tight, dangerous smile that made Cassidy falter as she stepped down. Then it was my turn. Amelia's questions were gentle. Did you know about the 52 million before you opened the hidden compartment in the box? No. Why did you pay his heating bill last year? Because he was cold. And I had the money. Did you ever ask Walter Hayes for money? Never. Sterling's cross-examination was brutal. You admit you found the key. You admit you went to the lawyer alone. You admit you hid this from your family. I followed Grandpa's instructions, I said calmly. He told me not to tell them. He said they would destroy each other over it. Because you manipulated him into thinking that, Sterling shouted. No, I said. Because he knew them. Amelia stood up when I stepped down. She buttoned her blazer. She looked at the plaintiffs with a pitying, terrifying smile. Your Honor, the plaintiffs have built their entire case on the assertion that Walter Hayes was incompetent and that the events of Christmas Eve were manipulated by my client. She picked up a small black hard drive from the table. The defense is ready to present video evidence recorded by the deceased himself on the night of Christmas, documenting the entire evening, the giving of the gifts, the plaintiff's reactions, and a specific testamentary statement made by Walter Hayes regarding his mental state and his intentions. The reaction was instantaneous. My father's face went white. Karen's binder slipped from her hands. Cassidy stopped texting. Sterling shouted objection. This is an ambush. Judge Harrison allowed it. The lights dimmed. The screen flickered to life. The living room of the cabin filled the courtroom. The timestamp read December 24th, 7:30 p.m. Grandpa's hidden cameras, the ones he installed to watch squirrels, but actually recorded everything, captured every sneer in crystal clarity. My father ripping open his envelope. A card? That is it? Thanks for coming, Dad. Are you serious? The audience gasped. Then the box moment. Cassidy's shrill voice. It is literally just a box. An empty box. The courtroom watched her snap the photo. Grandpa gives Riley a literal box of nothing for Christmas. Iconic. Broke Grandpa empty box HOA. Karen's voice cut in from the video. This is why we have rules, people. Empty boxes lower property values. We must protect the community. The real Karen in the courtroom let out a strangled sob. The video fast-forwarded. The family and board stormed out. Then Grandpa alone, walking straight to the camera. If anyone is watching this, specifically a judge or a lawyer, let the record show that it is 10:15 in the evening on Christmas Eve. I am of sound mind. My heart is failing, but my brain is just fine. He listed every lie they had told. My son Eric, my daughter-in-law Linda, Mark, Diane, Cassidy, Karen, they failed. They looked at an empty box and saw an insult. They looked at me and saw an obstacle to their inheritance and their HOA power grab. He pointed at the kitchen where I was washing dishes. Riley is in there. She is washing dishes she did not dirty. She is staying in a house that is too cold because she thinks I need company. She kept the box. She did not ask for a dime. The courtroom was dead silent. Amelia clicked to the medical records. Perfect cognitive score 2 days before Christmas. Howard Kane's deposition. Walter drove himself to the office alone. Then the poison pill clause. Any contest forfeits their tiny bequest and triggers unlimited legal defense funded by the trust. One final clip. Grandpa in Howard's office. If you are watching this, it means my family and the board actually sued Riley. They actually did it. Eric, Linda, Mark, Karen, you are not just greedy. You are also incredibly stupid. I gave you $1,000 as a mercy. You wanted more. So hear this, Walter Hayes, being of sound mind and broken heart, declare that you get nothing. Not a penny. And I want the record to show that the only reason you are sitting in this courtroom is because you could not stand the thought that the nurse who cleaned my bathroom deserved more than the son who forgot my birthday, or the president who wanted my land for her community center. The screen went dark. The lights came up. Judge Harrison looked at the plaintiffs with pure disgust. The court is not a tool for disappointed heirs and power-hungry board members to relitigate the wishes of the dead. The Walter Hayes Trust stands as written. MS. Riley Hayes is the sole beneficiary. Motion for injunction denied. Petition to revoke dismissed with prejudice. Plaintiffs will pay all legal fees. And frankly, if I were MS. Rhodes, I would proceed with the defamation suit. Bang! The gavel sounded like freedom. The courtroom erupted. Reporters typed furiously. Neighbors whispered, "Did you see Karen's face? 52 million. I stood up. My legs felt strong. I buttoned my gray blazer. Thank you, Amelia. Send the bill to the trust. I walked down the center aisle, head held high as the whispers parted around me like the Red Sea. I walked out into the bright afternoon sun. The air smelled of spring thaw. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with oxygen that finally felt like it belonged to me. The aftermath was swift. The same HOA Facebook group that had smeared me now flooded with retractions. Karen was voted out in an emergency meeting. My family and the board scrambled to sell their houses before the liens hit. 3 nights later, they showed up at my door begging. I let them in, placed the wooden box on the table, and played the final clip Grandpa left just for them. When they left, defeated ghosts, I locked the deadbolt. Click. The most beautiful sound in the world. I placed the box back on the shelf beside Grandpa's photo. I opened my journal. The real inheritance wasn't 52 million. It was the right to live my life without begging anyone for permission. I turned on the electric fireplace. The flames danced on the brass corners of the empty box. To the world, it was just wood. To me, it was full of courage, full of closure, full of the sweetest revenge an old man ever planned from the grave. Merry Christmas, Grandpa. I kept the box.